Coming up, a side of Butch Jones that Vols fans will hate even more than the others, and some blunt talk about the Florida Gators. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We are glad you are with us as we talk about the SEC here over the course of the next hour, getting into a lot of what's being said about the league as we get ever so closer to the start of practice here coming up in just a few weeks. And this is clearly an off season where there is a lot of provocative opinions being shared about the SEC.
Yeah, I don't even know if I agree with your opinion that the Vols are going to hate Butch Jones even more. Listen, I think they're ready for him to move on. I think good. Get down in Tuscaloosa and infiltrate their program.
Maybe I'm wrong about this. Let me dive in. Item number one on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Charles Billingsley is the father of a pretty good tight end prospect, and I guess they had some sort of recruiting get-together. You may know more of the backstory details on this than I do, but Billingsley gets a little video of Butch Jones, and Jones is apparently very proud of his new job as an intern on Nick Saban's staff at Alabama. Here's the video of Butch Jones saying two words that former Tennessee coaches just aren't supposed to say. Take a look.
Record your boy. You got to record me. Let them know I'm having a good time, baby. Got my man, Coach Butch, in the building. Yes, sir. Roll Tide.
Now, I don't know that the guy here cares much about this or not, Billingsley. If he holds the camera on Butch to finish the Roll Tide with the sort of the sideways peace sign, the Roll Tide, that's the GIF Hall of Fame.
Oh, man.
I mean, seriously. Like, that's GIF Hall of Fame, or GIF, however y'all pronounce that. You're going to the Hall of Fame on the internet if you got Butch Jones going Roll Tide with the sideways peace sign.
Butch in the building.
See,
yes, sir. Roll Tide.
See, if he keeps the camera right there, if you keep the camera right there, that's GIF Hall of Fame. But he moves it too fast, and you end up hearing the Roll Tide. You got to sort of splice that back over top of there. I mean, you said you don't think Tennessee fans are going to be bothered by this. I agree with you that they're ready to move on. But there is something, I don't know, somewhat demeaning about Butch Jones, like shouting out Roll Tide for like 35 grand a year. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, you were making millions at Tennessee to try to beat Alabama, and then for like, you know, scraps off Nick Saban's table, you have completely sort of like gone over to the enemy side here. There's something about that that's unseemly. I don't know. It's almost hard for even a man of too many words like myself to put into words what I don't like about this video on behalf of Tennessee fans, but on behalf of Vols fans, I don't like it.
No, I understand that point of view too, and I tend to agree with you. Listen, on behalf of Alabama fans, I don't like it either. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the point of view I come from. Listen, it doesn't look good to me. There's just something so awkward. I think awkward is the right word for this video, right? I mean, Butch Jones looks like he's at an 8th grade prom. You know, he's like kind of got his pockets to the side. He's like, I'm not sure if this guy's filming me or not. Like, kind of looks at him, then looks at him again, like, oh yeah, hey, you know, sideways peace sign, roll.
Yeah,
it's so awkward, man.
I feel like there's got to be some sort of line of demarcation. Like, if you're in your 50s, which I'm assuming Jones is, you can't go sideways peace sign, can you?
No.
I mean, that is not a good look.
Yeah.
That is not a good look.
No, it is, and it's funny too, because like, listen, this is Nick Saban's house, you know, they're kind of doing the whole...
Is it Saban's house?
Saban's house is like karaoke night, you know, it's one of the things they do. Like, Miss Terry and Nick come up, bring people over for karaoke night. They have some of the assistant coaches that, you know, they get the parents over, kind of loosen things up a little bit. It's like Butch Jones doesn't fit in, though. It's like, you know, he's not sure where his place is yet in terms of these recruiting weekends. Hey, really, where do I put my words in?
Well, there's a part of me that wants to see Butch Jones like walking around like a waiter with like the tray up on his hand, giving out like champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Yeah. That sort of seems to be sort of a fitting place for Butch Jones on this.
Possible. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, that would be extremely demeaning to Butch Jones, but I mean, he has swallowed a lot of pride and gone down to Tuscaloosa and been part, you know, of things as an intern. So who knows what the end holds.
Chris McLeod says Butch Jones will be a better coach after he's built by Bama. I think that's certainly his hope here, not just to be a better coach, but to be sort of a rehabilitated reputation. Now, the Jones reputation is a little bit weird. You and I both had some problems with some of the things that he did at Tennessee last year, more than just losing games. I don't know, though, that he's quite as tarnished as Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian were for very different reasons. I mean, does Butch Jones come out on the other end of the Alabama experience as a better coaching candidate than he went going in here?
I don't think it's in the SEC, though. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the bridge has been burned in the Southeast, in my opinion. I think that Butch Jones can be a good coach if he learns some things along the way. Can he bounce back and be a head coach and be a good one? Absolutely. Does it need to be somewhere at Arizona? Absolutely. I don't think the SEC or the ACC.
Yeah, but I got to call BS on that, though, because you cannot burn bridges more than Lane Kiffin did in the SEC.
True.
Going back to his time as Tennessee head coach, this is a guy that I think embarrassed Tennessee. I mean, after 3 years working with Saban in Alabama, there were a lot of Tennessee fans that would like to have seen Lane Kiffin come back from Florida Atlantic and be a Tennessee coach before they hired Jeremy Pruitt. So there is something about bygones quickly become bygones here, and memories are just short for whatever reason. So I don't know that Butch Jones ever gets a job as like one of the 10 assistants for Alabama, but if he can go from intern to assistant, at that point in time, I think the jury's out. You know, the sort of, the sky's the limit for anywhere that Butch Jones may go after that.
Possible. I just have, and I still feel that way about Lane Kiffin. I have a hard time picturing Lane Kiffin landing as a head coach anywhere in the SEC.
I used to say the same thing all the time, and now I'm just not so sure.
I just don't see it, man. I don't see Hugh Freeze getting that opportunity, and possibly the ACC when you look at some of those schools. I just don't see it in the SEC. I don't feel that way about Hugh Freeze, Lane Kiffin, or Butch Jones. I'll have to see it. It'll have to happen before I'm like, boy, that's a possibility.
All right, let me get a few more comments here because there's some good stuff here. Austin Bell says that Butch Jones looks like the 127-year-old at the 18-year-old girlfriend's party. There is a little bit of like sort of like creepy guy coming back to high school there for Butch Jones. I don't know. He doesn't quite fit in there. I also agree with Brent Tiers, or at least I think what he says is interesting here on Facebook, that I'd love to see some video of Butch Jones maybe singing some Sweet Home Alabama on karaoke or something like that.
It's got to be coming, right? It's got to be coming. As soon as these recruiting weekends start piling up, it's coming.
Well, let me ask you about that, because so much of this stuff is videoed these days. I mean, Nick Saban singing karaoke would break the internet. I mean, I know that's an overused phrase. I do get that.
I think it's out there somewhere. I'm
Really?
not sure that it's not already out there. Listen, I know that they've got him like dancing at his daughter's wedding, but these videos of these karaoke nights, you can look them up. I mean, there's people that film. I mean, there was a recruit last year. It might have been Jacob Copeland or somebody that filmed, them doing the electric slide, kind of, in the living room.
I do sort of remember that.
Yeah,
that feels like a video he'd be okay getting out more so than the singing.
Probably so. Well, listen, I don't know if Nick sings karaoke, at all, but I'm sure if it does, there's a video.
Is there any point in these like sort of recruiting events where, and you would know better than obviously any of us because at least we're a part of the Alabama program with Saban there, where it's like cell phones off? Now, is there a cell phones off status to any of these parties at all? I mean,
I don't know about it, at Nick Saban's house. I don't think there is, because I don't think Nick Saban wants to make anybody feel uncomfortable. It's like, hey, listen, it is what it is at this point. Now, when the kids go off with other, the players that are already in the program, hey, we're going to go hang out with the players. Then I think, you don't want to toe that line.
Last comment here, at least series of comments over on YouTube. Grindhard asking who gets a job first. This is like a real coaching job. I'm going to assume he means not head coach, but like paid assistant in the SEC again. Butch Jones or Hugh Freeze?
I got to go with Hugh Freeze.
Well, Hugh Freeze is more attractive. I mean,
I gotta go with
trust me, if Alabama could have hired Hugh Freeze for anything, they wouldn't even be returning Butch Jones calls. They wanted Hugh Freeze big time. But the SEC told him no, which doesn't bode well for your future chances for employment.
Hugh Freeze is a better coach, and that's why I side with Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze is a better football coach at this point in time than for me to look around and say, who's going to hire Butch Jones? I mean, is it going to be Mizzou? Derek Dooley doesn't work out, all of a sudden
I could see Butch Jones going back and being like some sort of mid-major MAC level coach. I could see him being pretty happy doing that. The SEC may have just been too big for Butch Jones. All right, item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I thought that Tom Van Haren had a really interesting piece at ESPN.com looking at some top recruits who are kind of in their sort of final stage of their college career, kind of in a put up or shut up range to avoid being a bust. Now, I don't know what it says about the SEC that a lot of these guys either had one-time SEC ties, current SEC ties. This is obviously a league that attracts a lot of big-name prospects, and so a few SEC names on this list, including 2 from the Florida Gators. And given the fact that Florida's got a brand new coach in Dan Mullen, the fact that Florida's got 2 former elite prospects looking to make names for themselves in their final season, I found it to be pretty interesting. Let me show you some of what Tom Van Haren says here. I guess we'll start with Tom Van Haren on Martez Ivey, who is the left tackle now. And Van Haren writes that Ivey started out as a guard, but recently moved to tackle. It was named second team All-SEC last season. That means he's been improving year over year, but it hasn't made a huge impact on the Florida offense. Now, you've talked a lot about Martez Ivey. You obviously understand Ivey's situation because you played offensive line. He was, you want to go back to, I guess it would have been the class of 2015, if I have it correct. If you want to go back a few years ago, this was one of those top shelf recruits in the entire country. But as a guard, he was relatively unspectacular. Second team All-SEC is fine for Ivey a year ago, but I think that Van Haren's description of not making a big impact on the Florida offense, that may be fair. First of all, to put Ivey on a list like this, how do you feel about that? And I guess second of all, how do you feel about his chances of kind of overcoming some of that?
Well, I think he belongs on a list like this. Honestly, personally.
Well, hold on. It's a negative list to be on.
No, I know.
So you think he belongs on the bad list?
Yeah. I was disappointed in what Martez Ivey was a year ago. And Florida fans can refute that all you want to. The bottom line is we sat here in these chairs a year ago, and Jim McElwain told us the strength of the football team was going to be the offensive line. Jawan Taylor, McCoy, Brett Heggie, I mean, all these guys, they have an all-star lineup of offensive line. They returned the most experienced offensive line in the SEC this year down at Florida. And that's why I always point and say Florida's going to be better than a lot of people think they are because it's a good group. But Martez Ivey wasn't that guy. He was out of shape. His feet looked slow. I thought this guy was going to be an All-American caliber football player last year. And he didn't end up being that. And you can point in a ton of different directions. I'm going to point at Jim McElwain. I'm going to point at the strength and conditioning program. But the bottom line is he was a disappointment to me a year ago. And so I think he has the ability to bounce back, and I think he will.
Well, speaking of Jim McElwain, if you want to go back to about a year or so ago, McElwain offered a defense of Martez Ivey. Because of some of the things that the ESPN writer mentioned, McElwain then said we hadn't seen the best of Ivey yet. Here's a reminder of the description of Ivey as he was preparing to make that transition from guard over to tackle.
Tez is a natural left tackle. That's what he was coming out. It speaks volumes to his unselfishness that he went in there and played at guard knowing that we needed that to happen. That first year we got there, just because through some bum luck and some things that had happened, we only had 4 scholarship offensive linemen. So piecing a group together, which we were able to do, and in Tez's case, I think he'll really flourish now. He has that ability to move on the outside.
I mean, how about that notion that Jim McElwain would say it's more about selflessness of playing whatever position we needed him to play, and yet, I mean, big-time elite prospects that have the size and everything that Ivey brings to the table, they're supposed to dominate, right?
They are supposed to dominate. And this is, you can call it selflessness all you want to. And I agree with that to an extent. I mean, there are sometimes you just have to swallow your pride and say, hey, listen, nobody else can do this. Listen, I had to play left tackle in a pinch. And against Utah in the Sugar Bowl, I only played like 8 plays because I got hurt, but I had to play left tackle. Am I a left tackle? Absolutely not. Did I have to go out there because the team needed me? Absolutely. But Martez Ivey has the tools. That's where the thing is. Martez Ivey he should have the footwork. He has the ability, he has the strength. He has everything you need. He just has to stay in shape, watch us weight, and make sure he fits in that scheme, under Dan Mullen the way he's supposed to.
Rick King said if these players would have had better coaching, better strength and conditioning, this would be a different conversation. Let's stay with Martez Ivey for a moment, then we'll bring up Antonius Clayton. But is Rick right, the commenter here, who's a big-time Florida fan, that some of the Ivey problems go back to a Florida strength and conditioning program that has been really kicked around in the wake of McElwain being fired and Dan Mullen being brought in?
It has to me, and it points directly back to it because when I saw Martez Ivey, and I've mentioned this a few times, I watched Martez Ivey play Michigan last year, and Michigan ended up being a top 5 defense. I mean, they were a really good defense. He looked so out of place. I mean, those quarterbacks behind him didn't stand a chance. It wasn't just Martez Ivey either. It was the entire offensive line, and they looked okay for the first half. And then you get to the third quarter and their feet start slowing down. And then all of a sudden there's some hip bend. And then all of a sudden their knees aren't moving very fast. They looked out of shape. And so I mentioned this even before all this came out about Nick Savage and all these changes going out of Florida. You remember that. I thought Martez Ivey looked out of shape last year. And so if he gets that corrected, I think the sky's the limit.
I want to read a comment from James Hayes on Facebook. Before that, let me bring in another Florida player in this conversation, Antonius Clayton, who did have a good spring game, by the way. He's also one of these guys of former top-level recruit, maybe hasn't even had a chance to play a ton yet for Florida, and certainly hasn't put up big numbers, but Van Haren over at ESPN says he's another guy who may have the light come on this season. Tom Van Haren writes from ESPN that the fact is Antonius Clayton's still young, only entering his true junior season. It gives reason to believe that Clayton can make an impact. The Gators had plenty of depth at the position, so it has been tough to crack the starting lineup, but this should be a year that Clayton takes a step forward. And from that standpoint, this is actually not the first time, even this offseason, this spring and summer, we brought up Antonio Clayton in this regard, because Sports Illustrated was sort of saying the same thing about him before. And it reminds me of what James Hayes is writing here on Facebook, that a lot of current recruits, he means 2019 and 2020 kids, are not wanting to go to Florida because they're losing their luster. They're not like they once were when they had Chris Leak or Tim Tebow. Now, those were obviously very talented teams, but I would take the more positive spin on this for the Gators just for a moment. If you are Dan Mullen, you're looking to build a big-time class for 2019, what better way to do it than make Martez Ivey a better player in 2018 than he was in 2017? Antonius Clayton, who's had a hard time getting on the football field, not only do you find him playing time, but you find him some sacks when he gets there as well. At that point in time, Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator, Dan Mullen kind of in charge of the offense, they're really going to have something to sell at that point.
They definitely are. And this to me is, it's bigger than Martez Ivey. It's bigger than Antonius Clayton. I think this is both lines of scrimmage, in my opinion. This is Jabari Zuniga and CeCe Jefferson and Jawan Taylor and Brett Heggie and all the other names you want to name that are on those lines of scrimmage. That's where it comes out. That's where, if you're out of shape or if you're not, if you know the development's not there, that's where it comes out, because these guys are getting leaned on every play. It's not somebody sprinting, it's not somebody throwing. This is power football and people that have to be in shape throughout the game. So you name it. I mean, go down the list of defensive linemen, go down the list of pass rushers, go down the list of offensive linemen. That's who you're going to see develop here in year one, and that is reason number one why I've been higher on Florida than most people have this offseason.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to watch out, and if that does develop the way that you describe, that could be big news for the Florida Gators. All right, let me go to item number 3 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And this is a bit of a, what does the news guys say? This is an update on a developing story. We talked yesterday about what Les Miles said on Josh Ennis's Houston radio station. Seemed to be critical of LSU coach Ed Orgeron about asking for patience. I said on the set yesterday, I'm not quite sure the patience that Les Miles heard Ed Orgeron asking for. We do have an update on that. We'll tell you about that. But as a reminder of all of this, here is Les Miles, I would describe as coming unhinged, as he seems to let slip here a little bit of a disregard, disdain, maybe is the right word, for current LSU coach, the guy that replaced him, by the way, Ed Orgeron. Here is Les Miles from Houston Radio, like you haven't heard him in a while.
I never accepted the feeling of, hey, you need to have patience. When you say that you need to have patience, aren't you really just saying to your team you're not good enough? Because I want you to know something. I never took the field with the Tigers where I didn't think I was absolutely going to kick somebody's tail and that we were the best team, period. I don't give a shit. It took me a time in the week to get myself in a position where I said, yeah, okay, we got it. We got the plan. The plan is in. We're ready to play. Yeah, that took some time. But I never asked for, hey, give me a break here. Hey, listen, the Tigers are good. Tigers got good players. Tigers can play. Hey, you know what? We didn't make any mistakes. You guys are going to play your butts off this Saturday, and you're going to kick the living hell out of the opponent. And that's just the way it is. This is our day. This is not their day. Are you kidding me? You are the Tigers. So I always felt differently than, certain people need to have a safety net. If you need a safety net, you need not coach for the Tigers, because the Tigers are your safety net.
So that's Les Miles. There really is only one way to take that from my standpoint. He doesn't like Ed Orgeron. Feels like Ed Orgeron is unbecoming in what he thinks the LSU coach is supposed to be. I'm sure Miles has himself in mind when he thinks about how LSU coaches are supposed to act, and seems to have a real problem with Ed Orgeron asking for patience. Now, I told you yesterday, I couldn't think of any time that Ed Orgeron had sort of asked for some huge level of patience from LSU fans. Well, Alex Hickey followed up on this topic at SEC Country, linking to an old story from the Baton Rouge Advocate leading into the spring game, where I guess Orgeron does ask for some measure of patience. Here is Ed Orgeron, as quoted by Ross Dellinger, the Baton Rouge Advocate. This is Ed Orgeron. We don't have the whole offense in. This thing is going to go throughout the summer, throughout camp. We want to look good next Saturday. That's the spring game. I want the quarterbacks to look good. We want to throw the ball. Want all that to happen. I believe some of that is going to happen, but we're not there yet. I asked the fans to be patient. We're not where we need to be, but we're going to get there. Now, I read that from Ed Orgeron, as quoted by the Baton Rouge Advocate, as Ed Orgeron asking for patience for the spring game with a bunch of quarterbacks that have never played before and a brand new offensive coordinator. What I don't hear from Ed Orgeron there, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I don't believe I've heard from Ed Orgeron anywhere is, hey, in 2018, we're not going to be very good, we need your patience. So given what you hear there from Orgeron as sort of context, what Les Miles said, how does it change, or maybe not at all, the way that you feel about what Les Miles says about Ed Orgeron?
It's a stretch. And honestly, the more you dig into it, and I think somebody in the YouTube comment section just kind of said this, it does sound more like sour grapes. If that's what he's referring to, if that's what he's trying to dig up, if there's something where Les Miles has been reading up on the LSU program, and that's what he took out of that I need patience in the quarterback situation throughout spring, that if you're asking for patience at LSU, you're in the wrong spot, then it sounds like sour grapes. Now, do I know for sure that Les Miles was talking about that instance? Who knows? But if he was pointing to that, and it's just such a tough situation because Les Miles is obviously a guy I respect. I think a lot of LSU fans still respect the guy, but it does head down that direction. We mentioned this yesterday. It heads down that direction of saying, at what point is this just sour grapes from a coach who was fired and let go?
And if I'm an LSU fan, here's what I feel about this, and where I'm already seeing a lot of comments from people that like Les Miles still. But the one thing that I would say is that these lines, in terms of questioning Orgeron, really almost delegitimizes Orgeron a bit, and it has the risk of being damaging to LSU because when coaching changes occur, there can be a rift within the fan base. I mean, I can speak to the Georgia situation here. When Rick was fired, even though everybody loves Kirby Smart now, there was divided fan base. At the end of the 2015 season, of people who wanted to keep Rick and people who wanted to move on to a Kirby Smart. There was a division there. That's the big reason why Kirby wanted 93,000 at G-Day, to kind of bring everybody back together.
Yeah, and it worked.
I guess it did. But I don't know what the LSU situation is. But if there's a similar division there, to have Miles speak out against Orgeron is bad. I mean, it's sort of a tradition in American politics. Old presidents don't speak about the new president. That's just a way that one president at a time. I think for LSU, you got to have one coach at a time here. Yeah. And Les Miles is sort of encroaching on Orgeron's space, and I think Miles probably feels bitter about the way that he was let go here. But this is not problematic for Miles and Orgeron personally. It's really potentially problematic for the entire LSU program.
No, and I don't know if it extends that far, in my opinion, but I think Tyler Mann brings up a good point. If anyone should have been asking for patience with the quarterback position, it was probably Les Miles that probably should have been bringing that. I don't know. I don't think this is. I think the LSU fan base is past that. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're to that point where, hey, Les Miles ain't coming back through the door. This is not a interim situation where this guy's going to get fired at the end of the year, and then Joe Oliva botches things, and then goes back and rehires the guy, and then fires him 8 months later. And if you're at Orgeron, you don't care who they replace you with, but Les Miles saying what he said, it only makes it easier for fans to turn against you during the season. I agree, but I feel like, and I can't speak for the LSU fan base, but I feel like that Les Miles is so far gone in a lot of those circles that it's not something divided. I think that, and we've talked about this before on this show, I think LSU fans are excited about what could be possible, but are not yet willing to jump in with both feet on Ed Orgeron, if that makes sense. I think that LSU fans are behind Ed Orgeron. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think when it comes from the Les Miles point of view, I don't know if anybody's turning on Orgeron for Les Miles at this point. I think that story's over and done with.
Well, let me give you John D. Giles on Facebook as an example. He says we, meaning LSU, he's obviously a fan, we're blessed to get Les. We lost Tricky Nicky, and then we got someone truly loyal to us, and we crapped on him. That's what John Giles says there, and I'm going to assume that Giles' comment here in the Facebook comment section is at least partially reflective of some LSU fans here.
Yeah, and Shannon Burgess and Cliff Nelson are kind of diving in the same way on YouTube. So Cliff Nelson saying anything negative from Miles only makes things worse. Shannon Burgess saying, I don't understand why he wanted to sabotage a program he claims to love so much. And so maybe you're right, man. Maybe I'm overstepping my boundary by having this conversation. I don't feel like
you're just an LSU hater. You want the dumps. Everybody
knows I'm the LSU hater on here. So to me, this is something that's gone. It's a bad look on Les Miles, but it doesn't have anything really to weigh on Ed Orgeron, in my opinion.
All right, let me do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So ESPN recently had a list of top concerns for their way too early, or I guess now we're sort of transitioning out of the way too early phase, and now it's just preseason top 25, right? And you have a few SEC teams obviously on this list, and I noticed that 3 of them, according to the ESPN writers, have the same concern. Mississippi, I should say, excuse me, Mississippi State. I apologize for that. Mississippi State, Auburn, Texas A&M. According to the ESPN writers who filled out this little survey here, all three of these preseason top 25 teams, the biggest concern for all three of these teams is wide receiver. Which I think is kind of interesting here. And I guess if I were to ask you about Mississippi State, Auburn, and A&M, which of these three is the wide receiver position the most legitimate concern, and for which of these three do you think wide receiver is eventually going to be figured out?
I think if I'm picking one that eventually is figured out, I'm going with Auburn. I think there's too much talent spread around. Obviously, the injuries, back in the spring, Eli Stove and I think Will Hastings, it might have been, that injured both their knees. That's concerning. But you still have Ryan Davis, who I'm pretty sure might be the single-season receptions holder there at Auburn in terms of what he did last year. So you have a one, and you have Nate Craig Myers, and you have Darius Slayton. You have a receiver corps. The most concerning one for me, and the thing that's been most concerning all along about the Mississippi State football team, Mississippi State doesn't have a number one. They don't even have close to number one. Their number one last year was Donald Gray. He left, and he wasn't even a number one last year. Add that into all the questions you've had about Stephen Guidry. Is he showing up on campus? Is he not going to show up on campus? Is he going to play football this year? Iron all those things out. Mississippi State is leaning on a ton of unproven commodities at the wide receiver position. Texas A&M somewhere in the middle. Jamon Osmond will be pretty good. He's not Christian Kirk. You spread it over a little bit. You add in Jay Sternberg at the tight end position. They're fine. I think Auburn's going to be fine. Mississippi State's got some issues at wide receiver, though.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right about this. I agree with almost everything you said there. That for a Mississippi State team that wants to be, not just ranked in the top 25, they want to be a real SEC West contender. That Stephen Guidry story is just weird. Is he playing? Is he not? I know that Brandon Walker's had some provocative opinions on that. That's a tough situation for Mississippi State to be dealing with, and it's a difficult thing for a first-year coach to have to try to navigate and decide here as well. And, with all due respect, when you think about quarterbacks here in this situation, because it's always a tandem discussion. When you're talking about wide receivers, you're talking about quarterbacks. Ultimately, you rattle off the names for Auburn. What I know is that Auburn has the best chance to make stars out of the group that it has, Nate Craig Myers included, because of these teams, they got the best quarterback. Jared Stidham is a good quarterback. Jared Stidham is going to make players out of his wide receivers. I think they're going to throw the ball more this year. I think that Chip Lindsey, the offensive coordinator, is going to have more of a say in what gets done there. And I think that Stidham is good enough to make players out of what he has there. With all due respect to Nick Fitzgerald, who is a very popular guy, not just with Mississippi State fans, but with a lot of SEC media circles. Nick Fitzgerald's not making a star out of anybody that doesn't already have kind of that in their DNA. But I do think that Jared Stidham's capable of doing that.
I agree, and I think Stephen Early says it best here in the Facebook comment section. Mississippi State's best running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and halfback is Nick Fitzgerald. Yeah, because it's true. And I think it was Malik Deer that got injured a year ago that tore his ACL headed into the year, or tore something in his knee headed into the year. That could have been your number one. Donald Gray never ended up being a number one. It was a bunch of no-name, no-commodity wide receivers at Mississippi State that they tried to make do with. That that ended up being a group that wasn't very good. The numbers weren't very good. So you're going to add Stephen Guidry to the mix. And I know you've got a couple of other players you signed, Devontae Jason, Malik Heath. They're going to add those guys in and say, okay, what can we make of this? But in terms of those three teams, Mississippi State's by far and away at the bottom of that list.
How about Cliff Nelson, who is an LSU fan, but he says that Stidham is just an okay quarterback. This is on YouTube. Cliff says wide receiver is going to make him better before he makes them better. Come on, that's not fair.
I'll say this for Cliff.
That's not fair. You better not say anything that in any way agrees with Cliff.
No, I'm not going to agree with him. Fair. What I was going to say about Cliff is, I'll say this much. He's been steadfast in his opinion about Jared Stidham. About Jalen Hurts and about Jared Stidham over there in the YouTube comment section. I think Jared Stidham's very good. I think that if you're nitpicking Jared Stidham, he doesn't deal with pressure as well as you want to, but I think a lot of that has to do with Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey. I don't think they're giving him as many outs to deal with the pressure as you want Jared Stidham in the past.
And I'll say this as someone that's just curious about the Auburn situation. Obviously don't root for Auburn, but just curious of the situation. I hope that Chip Lindsey has more control over that offense this season to give a little more freedom to Jared Stidham. I want to see what he can do here.
To me, and I cringe when I see this because as an offensive lineman, things are going to happen. Blitzes are going to come. Defensive linemen like Clemson last year against Auburn, some guys are going to go around. You can't block all of them. If they're bringing 7, 8 guys, you can't block all of them. Jared Stidham had no outlets. I mean, he had nobody in the flats coming off either side. There was no check downs half the time. It was like either a 60-yard pass or he was getting sacked.
Let me do Texas A&M here for a minute because I think that A&M in the middle of this discussion, neither one of us are very high on Mississippi State. We're both a little higher on Auburn. A&M in the middle is very interesting for the same reason I just talked about Auburn. A good quarterback, I believe Jared Stidham makes his wide receivers better. The combination of either Nick Starkel or Kellen Mond, are they good enough to do that? Not having Christian Kirk in College Station is a big deal. Now, eventually, I think that Jimbo Fisher's going to have that offense humming. But in the immediate, not having Christian Kirk anymore is a big deal. And they've got some raw talent. You kind of rattled off the names a moment ago. But do I trust a Starkel? Do I trust a potentially Kellen Mond? And I guess Starkel's probably still the starter. Do I trust Starkel to do what I think that Jared Stidham can do in Auburn? Honestly, I think the jury's still very much out on that. Better than Mississippi State, but not like Auburn.
Yeah, and I don't think Starkel is going to be asked to do the same things that Jared Stidham is. It's a different offense. Jimbo Fisher is going to have these guys under center a lot. Now, I like I said, they've got some nice pieces. Jamon Osmond, I think it's Cameron Buckley's the other guy's name.
Yeah, Jamon Osmond's one you hear a lot about this offseason.
Well, and listen, and it's the I think he's a JUCO signee, Jay Sternberger, the tight end that made all the highlight reel catches for the A&M in the spring game. 80-yarder here, 60-yarder here. This guy is your good old-fashioned, bare hands, kind of tight end guy. I think they incorporate him a little bit more. I don't think it's just one guy taking over for what Christian Kirk was. I think you add up the list, you put it all together, and you see what you have. I agree with you that I don't think Starkel is what Jared Stidham is, but I don't think they're going to ask him to be.
On Facebook, Jamie Blanton says, everybody better be worried about the South Carolina wide receivers. I'm even hearing some talk of 4 wide receiver set looks, 5 wide receiver core. He says it's the top 5 wide receivers core in the country. That's from Jamie Blanton there on Facebook, who is a South Carolina fan. Speaking of the Gamecocks, let's make them the subject of item number 5 here on SEC Country Live here today, because this same ESPN article that mentioned concerns about the Auburn and Mississippi State and Texas A&M wide receivers said the biggest concern for South Carolina, which is ranked in the preseason top 25 for ESPN, involves not the presence of the wide receivers, but the absence of Hayden Hurst, who, I will tell you, of all the players that I saw in person last year, nobody was more impressive in person compared to their sort of TV persona than Hayden Hurst. Now, I already knew he was a good player, but when I saw him in person in a live game last year, I just remember thinking, wow, he's not easily guarded. He's so big. He runs so well, puts those arms up, becomes such a big target there. He's a tough guy to guard, and you see that more in person because you can watch him on every play, and he's noticeable. Jamie Blanton says the presence of the wide receivers makes the absence of Hayden Hurst a little easier to navigate there. Do you agree with the South Carolina fans?
I agree with and Jamie. Me and Jamie have gone back and forth on the show. I agree with everything he's saying right now. It's hard to look past what that wide receiver core could be. And just to go back to what you were saying about Hayden Hurst, he reminded me of a young Tony Gonzalez last year when I'd watch him play, and I played with Tony for a few years. The way he moves and the way he's able to go up other people and just how big he is in person, that's what Hayden Hurst reminded me of. Now, listen, Brian Edwards, Shi Smith or Trey Smith, and then you add Deebo Samuel back into that mix with the number, 250 yards receiving I think he had in 2.5 games last year. They are going to be extremely dangerous at the wide receiver position.
Stephen Early says Jake Bentley is going to be a 12-year-old kid playing Madden with 99 overall Jerry Rice. He's going to chuck it for the corner, tiptoe to Deebo, and pray. 5 wide Hail Marys and first and always. So Stephen Early, obviously pretty high on the South Carolina offense there. But how about Greg Steele, who is a Florida fan, who says, with all due respect, I'm not scared of the South Carolina wide receivers. Come on, Greg. Listen, there is not a player on the Florida roster who is anywhere near as good or as valuable as Deebo Samuel. Not a player on the roster.
That's hard to disagree with.
Not a player on the roster.
The only thing you could say is that what is Deebo Samuel coming back from injury? But if he's anything near like he was last year,
well, if he's hurt, that's obviously changed everything. But if he's healthy, we saw it was only a brief window. Some of y'all act like if it only happens for 2 or 3 games, it doesn't count at all. In those couple games where he was healthy, he was about the most dynamic thing we had in the SEC. Very similar to Christian Kirk in a lot of ways, and for a full season, even more dynamic.
I agree with you, and that's never been a point of contention for me. Deebo Samuel was incredible. My point of contention with South Carolina always has been, if you needed Deebo Samuel to, for some of the game plans, the up and downs you had last year, then you probably weren't going to win some of those games anyway.
All right, well, let me do one more point on South Carolina here, because the other thing about playing more receivers, 4 wide receiver sets, things like that, is this stated mission of South Carolina from back in the spring, the transition to Brian McClendon as new offensive coordinator, Dan Warner's the new quarterbacks coach, of playing faster, playing more up-tempo. Let me remind you what Will Muschamp said about that really just a few weeks ago. Take a listen.
They look good. I think it was one of the things I addressed with them at the end. I said, our tempo's got to continue to improve and get better, and we've got to have that spot the ball mentality on both sides of the ball. We were dragging a little bit on defense, but there's no doubt that it benefits our football team. You saw some things that opened up in the running game and the passing game because of the tempo today, but it also helps our defense as well in preparation for the fall.
So the one thing I have said here is, while I think that South Carolina is going to be a pretty good team, when it's all said and done, I think the temptation to slow things down to help out the defense, I think that's going to be too great for Will Muschamp. I've made this point over and over again. I don't take him at his word when he says they're going to be up-tempo offensively. Do you agree?
I have a hard time with it because of what we know Will Muschamp's defense could and should be, right? I mean, they are recruiting at an extremely high level right now. Now, maybe if you look towards the future and you look towards next year, you say, listen, that defensive front should be good enough to really run that style. But I have a hard time with coaches that they use the manual gear shifter, right? Sometimes they put it in gear, sometimes they back it off. I don't think it's that easy to do for players. Now, a lot of times we didn't use that system. We used something called red ball sometimes, where we would go like no huddle and get up and we'd have code words and snap it. But no huddle has taken on a completely different meaning in the last 10 years since I left college football. And so I think it's tough for college football players to put it in gear, then take it out of gear, then put it into gear. It's going to be interesting to see when Will Muschamp has that. When he has a tired defense, when he has an offense that's going up and down the field on him, at what point does he kind of call that off or put it back into gear? It's going to be interesting to watch.
All right, item number 6 here, SEC Country Line, first and 10 list. Barton Simmons from 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, CBS and 24/7 have a bit of a relationship, is a guy I like. I think he's incredibly smart. I think his take on college football is generally pretty good. I could not disagree more, though, with his ranking of quarterback rooms. He looked at the quarterback situation for all the teams in college football, put them in the sort of the top 25 order here. We won't worry about the teams outside the SEC. Let's just talk SEC only here for a moment. And Barton Simmons from 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, in ranking the SEC quarterback situations, the total number of quarterbacks, he puts Alabama over Georgia. Now, this is obviously such a stereotypical argument because I'm going to argue in favor of Georgia. Maybe you argue in favor of Alabama. At the risk of sort of playing too much to type here, I am not trading Justin Fields for Mac Jones and Jalen Hurts. If you gave me that trade right now, I'm not taking a 2-for-1 on that.
I mean, I don't. But the thing is, what he's saying, I think, is that Georgia's got 2 quarterbacks right now, right? I mean, that's you have it's all about the situation, right? I mean, I don't want to dig too deep into your words here, but I think he's talking about what situation is better.
That's what I'm saying. He says that because I'll read what he wrote in a second, but he says because Alabama's got 3 quarterbacks, that's better than 2. And what I'm telling you is, if we say that 2 and from are something close to a wash, 2 pretty good starters, now we're down to the 2 backups for Alabama, the 1 backup for Justin Fields. If I was the general manager of Georgia football and you want to do me a 2-for-1 trade, I'll take Mac Jones and Jalen Hurts.
Right,
I'll swap you out Justin Fields. I'm not making that trade ever. I'm not ever making that trade.
I understand that. I disagree with the angle you're looking at. I think the depth is the question here. Like, when Justin Fields gets hurt, that's one guy getting hurt. When if his knee folds up, that's one guy. Guess what? There's nobody else behind him. So the situation becomes better to me. If you have an issue with somebody getting hurt, then all of a sudden the situation's better over at Bama, and you got somebody else to plug in.
Here is Barton Simmons on Alabama. He says, when Tungo Vailoa wins the starting job, he'll emerge as one of the college football's best quarterback talents, and he's around for at least 1 more season. This also makes Hurts the most accomplished backup in college football. Even if Hurts transfers after the season, Jones will give Alabama solid depth in 2019 and beyond. So too will Tua's little brother Talia, a 2019 Tide commit. Now, I can't even get into the space-time continuum of starting to add commits into this list. They're not even – Talia's a junior in high school at the moment, or at least he's a rising senior. So he's saying, I'll take the Alabama situation, but if Hurts transfers, now you're down to sort of, middling 4-star Mac Jones in comparison to one of the 5 best players in the country a year ago, Justin Fields. Once again, that seems, is specious, is that a word?
Specious?
It seems specious. I think that's the correct usage. It seems specious to put Alabama ahead of Georgia here.
I think that, and listen, I'm trying to follow along what you're saying. I really am, but I think.
Do you not understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I think the point for me is, and we talked about this with Jarrett Stidham last year. We talked about this with a ton of people. If Jalen Hurts is 26-2 as a starting quarterback, it's hard for me to look at Justin Fields not knowing what he's going to do in a game and say, boy, I'm going to make that trade.
Here's why I think you're wrong. Ask 14 coaches in the SEC, Saban and Smart included. You have to start one guy this year.
Right.
Either Justin Fields or Jalen Hurts. You think the majority of the coaches in the SEC are taking Hurts over Fields? I don't.
I think it's tougher than you're giving it credit for. I think that Jalen Hurts does good things. Now,
how many SEC teams would, if Hurts became an open commodity on the open market, how many SEC teams would start Hurts right now? South Carolina wouldn't. Missouri wouldn't. Florida probably would. Tennessee
probably would.
A&M
but I mean,
wouldn't.
the same question goes for Justin Fields. We haven't seen Justin Fields, so we can say what we want to, and we can say he's the #1 quarterback recruit in the country, and he's dual threat, and he can throw the ball 80 yards. But we haven't seen him. Like it's the fear of the unknown. I think that you build. We build so many guys up. Listen, the conversation goes all down about what #1 recruits have been, and you could have made the argument before we've talked about Emory Jones a ton. Boy, you'd rather have Emory Jones at Tennessee, and I just think that.
Hold on. Now we've seen a little bit of Fields compared to Jones. They both had a spring practice go through. Kirby was happy with Justin Fields.
But I'm saying that's where I'm putting the brakes on. That's where I'm putting the brakes on is we haven't seen him. I made the same argument about Jared Stidham a year ago. I made the same argument about some of the other things. It just, if we haven't seen them, it's hard to know how they'll react in a game. And the fact of the matter is Jalen Hurts has a track record that says he's pretty good.
If you were the GM of Georgia football, you're trading Justin Fields for Jalen Hurts.
If I had to start one of them this year, probably.
Boy, I wish I could be in a fantasy football league with you.
Yeah, no, if I had to start one of them a week from today, I'm taking Jalen Hurts.
All right, let me let you hear the coaches on this. Obviously, Nick Saban likes both of his quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa. He's even said under the right circumstances, he might be willing to play both guys during the same game. Here's Saban on that point.
I haven't getting him in any spot, right now. So, we got two guys competing at the position. I'm not going to speculate on things that may or may not happen. We have a lot of choices and decisions and things that we have to make. So we're not going to really answer questions that are hypothetical in nature, which you seem to love to answer.
So that's obviously Saban trying to sidestep some of that, but he clearly likes his guys. The same for Kirby Smart. Going back to the end of the Georgia spring practice, Georgia G-Day, when we saw both these guys on TV, in a roundabout way, Kirby was happy with both of them as well. Here's Georgia coach Kirby Smart.
I really thought that both quarterbacks managed the huddle, because that's what I look for, is what are they calling? Are they calling the right signal? Are they fixing guys that are broke? Are they saying the right thing in the huddle? Are they being positive when something bad happens? Elijah drops the ball. I'm mad at him. I'm frustrated with him. But Jake's, hey, get the next one. It takes that to get a young player to go where you want him to go, and I thought he and Justin did a good job of that.
All right, let me get a few comments here. Esteban Esteves, who's an LSU fan, says, I hope Hurts graduates and transfers in the SEC to a West team and plays Alabama for his season year and blows them out. It's ridiculous how they just trash his name like that. So that's a pretty strong opinion from Esteban Esteves. Maurice Carter, who's a Georgia fan, says there's no way Hurts is better than Fields without any starts. It's crazy to think that Hurts is a running back that can throw at best. Jarek Seegers, on the other hand, who's an Alabama fan, says that he thinks that Mac Jones for Justin Fields is a fair trade because Mac Jones has had 2 spring practices. I don't mean to be a jerk, but then why was Alabama begging for Justin Fields a year ago then? Because they already had Mac Jones.
Let me ask you this, though. Let's go back to a year ago. Let's go back to Jake Fromm a year ago. If you're trading, do you take Jake Fromm over Tua right now, too? Is that what you're trying to tell me? You think you're taking Jake Fromm right now?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's a harder decision from
but I think
Tua.
But what I'm trying to say is I think it's based on Fromm's track record. I think the fact that he's played, it gives you more in his corner. That's what I'm trying to say about Jalen Hurts.
But I would think that obviously coaches like Fromm a year ago, but Fields is a better prospect going into his freshman season than Fromm was a year ago.
I
listen,
agree with
coaches and recruiting experts and people like that would have raved about Fromm, but that sort of sounds like the general puffery of a guy that just everybody really likes.
Right.
Whereas Fields is the kind of guy that you can sort of measure out why Fields is as popular as he is.
No. Listen, I'm not trying to detract from what Fields is at all. The sky is the absolute limit for this guy. I'm just saying it's hard for me to look at it and say a guy who's never played a snap in an SEC football game that I would take right now to start a game tomorrow over a guy who's 26-2, regardless of what their ceiling is right now.
So if Hurts transfers, how does that change your opinion of the Alabama quarterback room?
I think it makes it very tough. And I think obviously, Nick going back and getting the kid from Arkansas State, it would tend to smooth things over, but you move him way down the list. I think that depth being a problem at that point, you've got to move him way down.
Speaking of quarterbacks, let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list and go back to what ESPN was saying about some of these former elite recruits who got to really put up here big time in 2018. Another one of those is Keller Christ, who initially was at Stanford, and Stanford recruits nothing but the top flight quarterbacks in all of college football. And now Keller Christ not really working out for him there, on his way to Tennessee, and ESPN says this is Keller Christ's chance to correct the record about his own career here. He says, this is Tom Van Haren writing, that Christ has the pedigree and experience, but there are only a few months for him to learn the system and win the job. Christ showed flashes of his ability at Stanford, and maybe a new setting in Knoxville will help him reignite that talent. That's interesting from Tom Van Haren there from ESPN. Obviously, we know that the Tennessee quarterback always has, Mike, a lot of pressure on him. But in the case of Keller Christ, who's also, I guess now, from at least one perspective, trying to prove that he's not a bust, going back to his time being recruited out of high school, is that even additional pressure on Keller Christ here?
I guess so. I mean, depending on what kind of guy Keller Christ is, I think it can be additional pressure. And I'm telling you, I'm standing on this thing, and I'm telling you the whole time, I don't think Keller Christ is the answer at Tennessee.
Really?
I really don't. And I've said I think this is Jared Garantano in the end. Now, will Keller Christ start a couple of games? Probably to start the year. I think Keller Christ is going to be put in there. But I don't think the offensive line is good enough to do what Keller Christ needs them to do. I just don't. I think that Keller Christ is one of those guys who a change of scenery all of a sudden has puffed up what he is. Now, I think he's a good quarterback. He got beat out by a great quarterback at Stanford. I just don't think he's the answer at Tennessee.
Well, I've made the point on this to you before, though, that if I'm a Tennessee fan, I'm going to root for the unknown commodity because I sort of know what Jerry Garantano is. And in this chair, in the same spot a year ago, said the same thing for Florida about Malik Zaire. Now, as it turned out, I was wrong about that. Zaire ended up not being very good, but I still think the overall position of, hey, if you're a fan of one of these SEC teams, you got a transfer quarterback coming in, you do put your hope in that. LSU's going to do that with Joe Burrow here as well. Maybe more reasons to feel good about Joe Burrow, maybe, but you put your hope in the transfer quarterback because if the current state of affairs was good enough, the transfer wouldn't be coming in.
True.
So if you're a Tennessee fan and Keller Christ is just another body at the quarterback position, boy, that's disappointing for the Vols. It was hugely disappointing for Florida fans last year with Malik Zaire. It will be disappointing if the same thing ends up being true for Joe Burrow. You want the new blood to give you some sort of fresh energy of the program because the unknown commodity has the potential to be the savior.
Yeah, and that's true. And Cliff Nelson asked in the YouTube comment section, who has a bigger impact, Chris UT or Burrows at LSU? I don't think there's any question to me it's Joe Burrows at LSU. I think that he gives them a viable option at quarterback where I'm not sure they had one really.
Well, here's where I think you're being unfair. I mean, I'm tempted to say Joe Burrow there too, but they're both transferring for the same reason.
Right.
Stanford's not the program Ohio State is. At that one position, it kind of is. Because as much as I talk about this Costello kid, if you read these preseason magazines, there's a lot of thought out there that he may not even start for Stanford this year because of whatever the quarterback's sort of behind him. That's a deep quarterback position. Ultimately, that's why Keller Christ leaves. Joe Burrow leaves Ohio State for kind of the same reason. So I like Joe Burrow a lot, but if you're going to say, oh, it's Burrow all the way, you're sort of ignoring the fact that Christ at Tennessee, his presence there is for the same reason that Joe Burrow left Ohio State. They weren't going to be the quarterback at the old school.
I guess, and this might rub LSU fans the wrong way. I guess what my opinion bases on is that I think Jared Garantano would have been the number one at LSU before Joe Burrows got there. I think that Jared Garantano would have been the favorite to start at LSU before Joe Burrows walked in.
Boy, you like him a lot better than I do.
All
I can remember is him sitting there sulking and pouting on that sideline against Georgia Tech last year.
But Jeremy Pruitt brings an attitude change, right? He brings an attitude change. He's changing the whole face of the program, the outlook, the development, the offensive style. It's changing everything. So I'm going to give Jared Garantano a little bit of a fresh start and say, hey, listen, kid, go do your thing. Be Jared Garantano. And I think the best Jared Garantano this year is going to be better than the best Keller Christ.
Well, speaking of Jared Garantano and Keller Christ, Mike Griffith, who's done a great job at SEC Country covering the Tennessee Vols, recently kind of weighed in on this subject about what a difficult potential decision it will be. A challenging decision for new head coach of the Tennessee Vols, Jeremy Pruitt. Here is Mike Griffith on that point.
It's going to be interesting to see how Jeremy Pruitt distributes the repetitions. You know, in the spring they were running 4 huddles. They were talking about having 4 offensive lines and everybody getting the same amount of repetitions. And you wonder if Jeremy Pruitt will take that same approach, particularly when Keller Christ and JT Shrout. Is there a catch-up effect? Will they get more reps than Garantano and Will McBride? I don't think so. I do think the coaches have to make a decision between Garantano and McBride as far as who's going to get the reps behind Keller Christ. Although early on, I would think JT Shrout will get equal work with Christ, and he'll have an opportunity to win the job. I'm sure that was part of the recruiting pitch to him and all the recruits. But to me, it's a matter of Tennessee trying to decide what their offense can do. And really, before they determine that, I think they have to have an idea who the quarterback is, even if they don't want to say that publicly.
So that's kind of an interesting assessment, I think, of the Tennessee situation. A guy that would know it well in Mike Griffith. It is a challenge facing Jeremy Pruitt, and the kind of thing that's going to go a long way in determining, can he win some of these games? A close, needed game against Florida. I mean, listen, sight unseen, the better quarterback's going to win. When Florida and Tennessee were, I think, on paper, relatively close, what Dan Mullen gets out of his quarterbacks, what Jeremy Pruitt gets out of his, the better quarterback that day is probably going to win.
And I'm just telling you that if Tennessee thinks with that offensive line they're going to go in and play that Florida defensive line that has a ton of upside with a lot of length and a lot of the defensive line and have Keller Christ at quarterback, in my personal opinion, now they can always game plan around it. They can always give Keller Christie outs. They can always have a strong running game. I'm not saying they can't. But Jared Garantano gives you so much more upside in that game, in my opinion. I just think that's how it plays out.
Item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Tomorrow's a big day for one 5-star cornerback and LSU in particular here. As Derek Stingley gets ready to make his college decision, he let us know on Twitter this is upcoming. Here's his announcement. I'll be posting my decision tomorrow. That means tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Central on Twitter. I will not have any hats on tables, nor will I have any press conference. I have a video that I will post announcing my decision. Stay tuned. That is Derek Stingley Jr. He's choosing between like LSU, Texas, one of the other schools kind of in the mix here. He told SEC Country, Sam Spiegelman reporting, kind of what he was thinking about, kind of why he gets here to this point. He says, it just feels like I'm at the end of it. During it got pretty hectic, and I'm just ready to get it over with. I made a decision, and now I can focus on an actual school. I guess there is some thought out here that LSU probably leads for Stingley a bit, and I would add to that, this is one that LSU really needs. After some high-profile misses on defensive backs in 2018, Ed Orgeron just needs a trophy on the wall of some kind anyway. I feel like, the real issue for Orgeron for me is not finding a quarterback or anything like that. It's really more about recruiting, and this would be about as big a get as Orgeron can get right now during the month of June.
It's a necessity, right? I mean, let's go ahead and put it out there. He's got to win this one. I mean, this is one of those battles that you put in front of Ed Orgeron and you put in front of LSU, and think of the fallout. If this kid gets out of Baton Rouge and heads to, I don't know, Texas, wherever you want to say that he might go, if that were to happen tomorrow, that would be the biggest black eye I can think of on Ed Orgeron at this point. But with all that being said, I don't think it happens. This kid is LSU through and through to me. I think the fact that he's shutting down his recruitment in the middle of June tells me that this is a layup for LSU, and he's headed down the street to play football.
Yeah, I think that's great news because, listen, I mean, you want to make the Les Miles Ed Orgeron comparison. We obviously did that earlier in the show. I mean, the one thing that Miles can say is, for the large portion of his time there in Louisiana, they had the state lockdown, fixture in the top 5. There's always been this sort of rotating cast. Alabama and Ohio State have been very near the top of recruiting for a long time. The other group kind of rotates a bit. It's Georgia now, but it used to be LSU. It used to be Florida State. I mean, that's the one thing that Les Miles could say is, hey, we're killing in recruiting. Ed Orgeron's been killed in recruiting more than he's done the killing here, and this is a big one for him.
No, you got to stop the bleeding, and it's there. That's what's so interesting to me. And we talked about this when you were gone a couple of weeks ago with Brandon Walker. He's like, Ed Orgeron's fired. Ed Orgeron's gone, and I said, listen, the blueprint is there. If you really look at where the recruits are in Louisiana right now, and how many of them are close to Baton Rouge, and how many of them LSU leans, I'm talking about Devontae Lee. I'm talking about, obviously they got Cardell Thomas. I'm talking about Ismail Sopsher. I'm talking about this kid right here. Those are 5-star talents that are leaning to LSU. That's how Ed Orgeron saves his job, and that's how he gets talent back to where it needs to be at LSU.
I agree with you. Tyler Mann on YouTube says LSU has to get this kid. LSU superfan checking in on YouTube to say that Stingley is an LSU lock. He's got Patrick Peterson as his cover photo, so obviously LSU fans feeling pretty good about that right now. And by the time we come on the air tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Stingley will have made his announcement. We'll be talking about that a lot on SEC Country Live tomorrow, and really looking forward to being able to do that. Let me move on to item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list for a moment. And obviously a lot of people are aware of the fact that I do Dog Nation daily every morning, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And a subject came up on our show this week that, while it was said about Georgia, it potentially has kind of some relevance for the rest of the SEC as well. You know that Georgia shows up on most of the rankings of easiest non-conference schedules, and really, when you can add that to the conference slate that Georgia faced this year, the East still thought to be somewhat down. Most people would say that Georgia just plays a pretty easy schedule. No schedule in the SEC is that easy. Georgia still got LSU and Auburn, but this is not among the toughest schedules we've seen from Georgia, and it's certainly not among the toughest schedules in the country. However, Chip Towers, who covers Georgia for DogNation.com, said one thing to keep in mind here. There's one aspect of the Georgia schedule that may be tougher than some people realize. It involves the quarterbacks that Georgia plays, and the Georgia secondary, the Georgia defense, going to have to get ready to face guys like Jake Bentley and Drew Lock right there in the first month of the season. Here's Chip Towers on this about Georgia, and I'll tell you why it's relevant for the rest of the SEC once Chip's done. Take a listen.
You know, everybody talks about Georgia's schedule and how favorable it is. The one thing that really concerns me in that regard is those two quarterbacks that Georgia's going to face in the first month and the two Columbias. I can promise you, they're not going to be throwing at DeAndre Baker. They're going to be throwing the other way. This is what they do. This is what every offense does. It's what they do every week. It's a preparing for teams, and all off-season, quite frankly, is game plan for a team, and they're looking around and they're, all right, where are the weak links? That's what we're going to attack, and that's what they're thinking.
So that's Chip Towers weighing in on that, saying that when you got to face Drew Lock and Jake Bentley, those are tough September games, and it's not just Georgia that'll face them. I mean, you know, Missouri is thought of as being a somewhat middling SEC East team, but Lock's probably a first-round pick. Isn't that game a little bit tougher for every team that has to play in the same way with Jake Bentley as well? When you go to the SEC West, I mean, I don't know about the situation in Arkansas yet, so I'll put them aside for a moment. But the other 6 teams in the division, 6 teams in the division, there's not a bad quarterback in the entire division there. Auburn and Alabama, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Burrow at LSU will wait and see on. I'm going to assume he's pretty good. I mean, there are a lot of SEC teams we don't know about yet. But boy, most of these SEC teams are going to be playing a pretty good quarterback more often than not, which is way different than it was a couple years ago. That is a little bit different kind of look at the SEC schedule, right?
I think it is, and I definitely, you know, this is going to be the Bama in me. I definitely agree with you out of the West more so than I do the East. For every good quarterback, I feel like in the East, I feel like there's also a question mark. I mean, for every Georgia you have, there's a Florida. You know, for every South Carolina you have, there's a Vanderbilt, there's a Kentucky. And so there are more question marks for me on the East. But we had this conversation last year about what the ceiling was of SEC quarterbacks. Shea Patterson was going to break all the records. You know, and things tend to play.
And Patterson was good.
He was good, but it's interesting to me the way things took a turn. It was Jacob Eason. You know, it's like and it's no knock on Jacob Eason, but he didn't end up being the starting quarterback throughout the year. So it's interesting to look at. We'd have to see it play out a little bit more, but I'm with you. There's not a guy in most of these teams, and I'd say probably 10 of the 14 SEC teams, you don't go in thinking, boy, that quarterback's not very good. They're good quarterbacks throughout the league.
I would agree with you about the West having more than the East. I would agree with you on that, but you mentioned Florida. You know, Florida is likely to be, and I'm not trying to start up with Florida fans, average team, average quarterback, right? You know what I'm saying? Whereas like a situation in Missouri, this is only an average team, but it's potentially a really good quarterback. Now, Derek Dooley obviously is a unknown commodity there, but it's potentially a really good quarterback. So it's one of those things where what should be one of your easier conference games, all of a sudden, especially if you're going to Columbia, you're thinking a little bit more about it because that's a quarterback that gives that opponent a puncher's chance there.
Oh, listen, Drew Lock coming to Tuscaloosa, don't think I haven't thought twice about that game. I mean, when you talk about
especially for an Alabama secondary that's replacing everybody.
Exactly. And so for that to be able to roll in, and I've highlighted some of those games. We've started to talk about them on Roll Tide Daily. Jordan Ta'amu at Ole Miss, they're in, I think, week 3 that Bama faces off against them. That's a tough game. I mean, these are good quarterbacks who, for everything you can say that's down about possibly their football team or their defense, they are going to throw the ball around. And they're going to have receivers that can be playmakers, and they have the arm strength to be able to get it done. Can lightning strike is the question.
Jazz Hatcher on Facebook says, started off by talking about Georgia. He says the Georgia secondary is going to get bombarded with the deep ball. Stephen Early, though, says if they do throw against us, Stephen's a Georgia fan, expect 20 interceptions for DeAndre Baker. Certainly Baker's the known commodity there in that Georgia secondary. There are a couple other guys who are going to be kind of worked into the mix there. Let's do item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And on this show, I try to be as honest as I possibly can be. I got to admit that the College World Series has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle for me a little bit in terms of my sports viewing. I watched a lot of these super regionals, a weekend or so ago. I have not watched a ton of College World Series yet. All 3 SEC teams are still involved.
Yeah.
Florida's actually playing right now. They are up 1-0 on Texas. I believe Florida's playing for its life here, right? Florida lost its first game in the College World Series, I think.
If we're being honest here and we're talking about, I haven't caught much of it either. And following, listen,
we got to start watching more.
Following along with Brandon Walker has been fun for me because I really am rooting for the Mississippi State team.
And they're doing great, right?
They are. I think
they won 12-2 today.
That is such a huge deal right now in Starkville that I really, really, if I had to pick one of the teams, I'm absolutely rooting for Mississippi State to pull like the mother of all like crazy seasons.
Well, I like Mississippi State because that's a fan base that like loves college baseball and deserves is such a bad word, but when you like baseball as much as these Mississippi State fans do, they just deserve it more.
No, listen, this is a Mississippi State team that everything that happened with their coaching situation, if they were able to win the World Series, we're making a movie about this in 10 years. You know what I mean? Like this is it's unbelievable what they've been able to do. It really is.
A movie?
Yeah. I've seen dumber movies. I would talk about it all the time. We've seen dumb sports movies out there. I think it would be cool to watch.
I think Arkansas is having fun because they're playing some old like Southwest Conference rivals. Like they're playing Texas Tech tonight. I'm pretty sure they beat Texas the other day. I mean, it's kind of fun when you get like an old like regional rivalry kind of taking place there in Omaha. Obviously, the Arkansas fans are having fun. We showed one of them jumping on the field yesterday.
Yeah, listen, I'm so jealous too because, and you mentioned this, Bama and Georgia. Like I haven't been able to see Bama really go that distance. I watched them in a super regional when I was in school, and that's as far as we've been able to talk. So I would love to be a part of that one of these days. And obviously, a lot of people are still watching in the comment section.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, we're going to try to watch more of this here lately. I think the problem is you had U.S. Open. I haven't even watched a ton of World Cup, but I've watched some World Cup. I'm watching the Braves.
Yeah.
Listen, my dance card for sports, once you get 3 things, like that 4th thing is going to be, like I almost forgot it was even going on.
I'm completely with you.
But 3 SEC teams, we got an obligation to support this.
I agree.
All right. We like to close the show the same way every day. We're always on the lookout for champions of life. Now, I got to try to set this one up because it's funny, but you got to have to like sort of know the story. So Mike been doing a little spring cleaning. This time of year, we're sort of post-spring, but this time of year, that's just what you do. You got too much junk, you start getting rid of some of it, and you sort of take some of it to Goodwill. Well, Mike, his old career was playing for the Atlanta Falcons. A lot of us have junk lying around from the job we used to have.
Right.
So when Mike took some of his old gear over to Goodwill, somebody happened to notice what Mike had. Mike took some shorts, and here's what somebody puts on eBay. NFL Nike on-field shorts, Atlanta Falcons 3XL, the big guy. Player worn in name, number 79. How about that?
So
Mike Johnson, $27.99. First of all, that's actually not even a bad price for like Nike shorts anyway. So you're not getting a lot of premium for the 79.
Yeah. Head scratcher, man. I cleaned out some, and football players have this stuff where you get a new outfit like every week, right? Even in college, you get a new outfit every week. So
a lot of gear.
A lot of gear.
I mean, listen, in this day and age, even high school kids get gear all the time. I don't know like where these apparel companies get all this stuff from, but you play like high school athletics.
Right.
You're getting shoes every other week. And
I got rid of so much Bama stuff and Falcon stuff, and you're sitting there going, nobody wants this crap. Who cares? Like, I've given so much stuff away to family, to friends, to cousins, to whatever.
But listen, we got a lot of Falcons fans watching it. If we knew you had those shorts to give away, I think there are a lot of people that would have liked them.
I mean, they're shorts, man. Like, I sweated in those things. I bled in them. I'm like, who would possibly want those shorts?
Well, now it makes it not sound too good.
Yeah, they're kind of gross, but, whatever.
What else you send them? You have some Alabama stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Some hoodie, like bowl hoodies. Definitely sent some of those. You get
some bowl hoodies?
Yes, absolutely. I probably had 15.
Like with like the bowl logo on them?
You get like the Petro Sun Independence Bowl. I mean, who wants that stuff, man?
Good Lord, that's.
Yeah. Listen, I didn't want it.
You should have brought that in.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, but
I guess so.
You gonna wear the Bama Bowl stuff?
No, but it's a part of college football history.
Listen, I'm alone on
this. It's been
a
long time since Alabama's been to an Independence Bowl. That's part of college football history.
I'm alone on the Bama Island here in Atlanta, man. Nobody wants that stuff.
All right. Anyway, we got to go. Podcast will be up. Make sure you check it out if you want to hear any other version of this show, more of this show. That'll be there for you on all the various podcast channels. Also, share the show with your friends. Let them know we're talking about the SEC, and we hope to be doing it for a long time. So check us out, YouTube, Facebook, everything in between. Let folks know we're doing it here every afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.